Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We are glad to have Miss Cindy Miller here today to update us on what she's been working on. She's been very busy and researching all the things that we're working on with integrated resource planning, CPRE, our interconnection stuff, everything that's happening in Act 62. So we're looking very much forward to hearing what you've got to tell us about what you've been doing with your comparison with other states and so forth. So, Ms. Miller, I'm going to turn it over to you without any further ado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Cindy Brown Miller of Cindy Miller LLC, and I have been working on research related to generic processes in Act 62. In addition to researching laws and orders, I've talked to staff of the commissions, and my focus has been on the surrounding states of North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, and then Florida. Also, as recommended, I've talked to people at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissions and NRRI. And as the chairman said, I've been looking at interconnection, integrated resource planning, net energy metering, and competitive procurement of renewables. My background is primarily as a public administrator and as an attorney. I was part of the Florida Public Service Commission staff for more than 30 years. Currently, I'm president of the Southern Chapter Energy Bar Association, as well as the head of my consulting business. So in this research, I've tried to stick to the letter of the orders, not to color it, shade it, whatever. And I've tried to make sure that I'm not coloring outside the lines. Basically, it should be noted that these are moving parts. When I would talk to the staff of the different commissions, they would say, well, we're just about to come out with a new order. Can you just wait like a week? We're about to, or we're about to have a new report. So some of this may be, that you'll see in a week, there will be something new come out. Does this sound okay? Thank you. Thank you. Also, I should note that the laws in the other states are different than Act 62, so sometimes maybe they do things that would fit within your law and other times not. We have provided the backup statutes, rules, and orders for the commission so you can cross-check information. Also, we've provided the reports on these topics for you all. In the last few months, I've attended a whole bunch of conferences to make sure I'm current. I've gone to the Energy Bar Association Mid-Year Conference in Washington, D.C., the Florida Energy and Climate Change Summit in Tampa, the Southern States Energy Board 59th Annual Meeting in Louisville. And I know that you have some people from South Carolina on that board, the Florida Municipal Electric Association Conference, and more. Let's see, I thought that it will help you to hear what other states are doing, and it may help when you do your review. Also, I should note that I listened to your workshop last week, and I thought that the point that the Regulatory Assistance Project made about how sometimes more creative solutions can come up in these generic processes than may come up in your actual cases was a valid point. So I think it is an area that's good for opportunities to see some good results. If you have questions today, I may follow up with a supplement in 30 days. Otherwise, I think this is the conclusion of the project. So let's get on with these PowerPoint. So I've put up the South Carolina language just so if we need to look at it, we'll have it. We don't really need to go over this. I know you will be seeing this many times in your work. I did think it was interesting that the law does talk in some specifics here that maybe aren't being taken up in so much in other states, like that number 2, have the utilities evaluate the cost of developing and maintaining hosting capacity maps to allow power producers to identify areas of the distribution grid that are more amenable to building and interconnecting their generation facilities and to avoid areas that are already saturated with distributed generation. I thought that was very interesting that they specifically listed that. So North Carolina. North Carolina had a very recent order on interconnection, so I thought that that was especially helpful, June 14th. And also I thought it was helpful to know that they had retained, I'm not familiar with this group, but a group called Advanced Energy Corporation to facilitate stakeholder discussions, and that they facilitated 4 large stakeholder meetings. So I thought that may be something helpful in your work on one of these areas. And it was suggested that I include the chronology from what North Carolina went through. And so I've done that. And again, they started actually, well, they first mentioned it 4 years before they came out with their order. But then the actual first meeting on it was in May 2017. So then they had those stakeholder meetings, and you can see they did 4 of them, and you can just see how they spaced them apart. And then the public staff submitted its report to the commission with a redlined version in December 15th, 2017. So that was a really key event, because then the commission could work off of that redline version, ask stakeholders, you know, do you have problems with this? And if so, what would you do differently? So they had a product to start working from. And I think that must have been very helpful. And then they went through and discussed why they did accept some changes from it and why they didn't. Also, I always find it interesting as to who intervenes in proceedings. So you can see some of the players that entered into this. IREC, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. They also had a specific area on swine processing, so they had some interveners that you might not see here. NCSEA, the solar people, Duke Energy Carolinas, Duke Energy Progress, Dominion Energy. Then they went through a lot of overlapping processes that came into this. So they weren't just dealing with coming out with this order on interconnection. They had some other things that were coming up there. I think the next thing I want to mention,
Certainly.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, found it interesting that the North Carolina process involves stakeholders. And did you get a chance to delve into their input, or is there any report that came out of the stakeholder meetings?
I would love to follow up on that. I think that when the commission came out with its product, it went into a lot of detail on what the stakeholders had said. I'm not aware, but I think I would like to follow up on
All right. And the reason I'm asking, hopefully we can learn from, I don't want to call it mistakes, but there may be lessons learned from North Carolina, especially since we share, you know, commonality in terms of the investor-owned utilities that are regulated. Duke obviously has a large presence in both states, and as does Dominion. So it seems to me that, you know, there might be lessons learned there that perhaps could shorten our time frame. 4 years seems like a long time. And so what I'd like, if you're going to follow up, I'd like to see if you could recommend a schedule, a proposed schedule that would compress that time frame so that we don't have to drag it out over 4 years. Just seems like a long time to me to implement changes that obviously need to be made quicker if possible, particularly in light of the new technological developments regarding storage and interconnection. Do you agree?
I definitely agree that you will not need 4 years. What they did the first 2 years were, they just put the word out, we're going to be doing this. And then they had the first real meetings in 2017. So I know that 2 years is where they are, but I'm sure you would like to condense it from that. I will take a look at that and see if I could do a compressed timeline.
That would be helpful. And then maybe also, when you look at it, see if instead of 4 stakeholder meetings, could that be reduced to 3 or 2? Since we don't have to reinvent the wheel, they've kind of got an order that gives us a roadmap. And I'm not saying we need to just adopt it as is. That certainly is not what I'm suggesting. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel, to use a cliche, and maybe we can just take that as a starting point. Their order is a starting point to, it's kind of a red line workup. Just a thought.
I will take a look at that.
And then the other thing that we face with, we're looking at not trying to do a number of things at once, but the integrated resources planning is right ahead of us. I'm wondering if, what comes first? What do we need to pay our attention to first? Would that be the first step or something else? I know I hate to jump ahead, but you're going to have some recommendations on that later, or?
We will be going through integrated resource planning next. I'm wondering if I'm the best person to do that look. I know that you have statutory requirements for your proceedings. I will look it over, but I may not be the best person for it.
Thank you.
So in North Carolina, I do think also they had these intervening events. So you won't have that, or I hope you won't have that. So I'm sure you could have a compressed timeline. So essentially, I think they took 2 years. And yes. The next big thing on their deal is the hearing. So the hearing was January 28th. And then you can see the post-hearing briefs and all that filed. So their order came out, 6 months, a little bit less than 6 months after their hearing. So I do think it's possible to have less than 4 stakeholder meetings. I think they had more of a luxury of time, but I will take a look at that. And here's Florida, and basically Florida has a rule on interconnection, and it divides the requirements into these different tiers. And I think it's Virginia that also does that. So tier 1 is 20 kilowatts or less. Tier 2 is greater than 20 kilowatts and less than or equal to 100 kilowatts. And then tier 3 is up to 2 megawatts. And basically what they did is they put the stiffer requirements on those higher level tiers and put very low requirements on tier 1. And I'll show you in Virginia's also, we'll see that, but they used they divided their levels differently. I put the purpose of Florida's rule. One of the reasons I did that is it may or may not dovetail with Act 62. Anyway, to promote the development of small customer-owned renewable generation, particularly solar and wind, diversify the types of fuel used, lessen Florida's dependence on fossil fuel, minimize volatility of fuel costs, encourage investment in the state, improve environmental conditions, minimize costs of power supply to investor-owned utilities and customers. As I looked at each state, I realized each state's purposes differed just by a little bit, but I thought, well, I should mention that. So Florida has what a lot of states do, some standard interconnection requirements. And basically they put responsibility on both the investor-owned utility and on the customer. So I don't think any of these are too different. They do have some discussion in there about liability insurance. So that may be an issue that comes up in your proceedings. Florida has a provision on a manual disconnect switch. So each IOU, investor-owned utilities, customer-owned renewable generation, standard interconnection agreement may require customers to install at their expense the manual disconnect switch. These are Florida's causes that the IOU may disconnect from the customer-owned renewable generation. Emergency or maintenance requirements on the IOU's electric system, hazardous conditions on the system, adverse electrical effects caused by the customer-owned renewable generation as determined by the investor-owned utility, failure of the customer to maintain the required insurance coverage. So you can see where all of these could have issues develop, such as the customer might claim that the investor-owned utility says this happened, but maybe they say it doesn't. So you can see where you'll have issues crop up on that. The applications process for interconnection, and this is very typical of what you will see in the other states, just that there are timelines, and there are timeline requirements for the customer and for the investor-owned utility. And you can see here that they put a little tougher burden on the Tier 3 interconnection. Are your slides working? Thank you. And I had a wonderful artist helping me with this, someone who had no interest in this and would not in any way relay information. Okay, thank you. And Florida has a separate rule on qualifying facilities. So they have the one rule on the kind of smaller customer-owned renewable generation and another rule on the qualifying facilities under PURPA, Public Utility. I ought to know what PURPA stands for. Virginia, here I mentioned Virginia has different levels. Remember, Florida had those 3 tiers. Virginia has 3 levels, and theirs are a little different. So level 1 is no larger than 500 kilowatts. Level 2 is no larger than 2 megawatts. And then level 3 is all the way up to 20 megawatts. So theirs were different. And And Virginia has a different set of rules on the net energy metering. So when we get to that section, you'll see some of their other points that they use. So I'm going to move to integrated resource planning, but is there anything anyone wants to ask on the interconnection? And I will be following up on the North Carolina timeline.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Miller, in the Florida case, what led to the manual disconnect switch? Is that something that they just, the IOUs and the parties just agreed upon? I mean, I see the reasons in your other subsequent slides as to why they have it and what reasons the IOU might want to invoke a disconnect, but you know, I know that's probably the state you're most familiar with, and I just wondered if you could share what led to that provision.
I would love to. The person who was the lead technical person in the rulemaking, I would like to call him and follow up with that and talk to him about that. But I'm sure that, I mean, I would guess that the investor-owned utilities said it was really needed, but I want to follow up on that.
So you're, you know, primarily, I guess, I do see some of the other reasons in here, but primarily what you're saying is maybe a safety function.
To protect their, my guess is it was to protect the utility equipment, but I would like to follow up on that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now we're moving into integrated resource planning, and this is your law, and let's see here. So your law is fairly specific as to what the IRP must include, and I've just listed those provisions out. Another thing I found interesting, and this is still your law, is the different states had different language about when a commission should approve it. In Florida, they say if you look and determine if it's suitable or unsuitable. And then in South Carolina, your language is more like I see in the other states, the most reasonable and prudent. So I did notice those differences, and I'm not sure what they mean exactly, but they're different. This is more on your South Carolina law. And there at the bottom, you can see you're authorized to promulgate regulations to carry out the provisions. North Carolina. So North Carolina has this rule R8-60, and all these materials have been provided. This is another area that I thought was interesting. There's a different timeline used in the different states for their integrated resource planning. Anyway, they talk about a 15-year forecast of native load requirements, an analysis of all resource options, a lot of focus on demand side management and energy efficiency. Also found it interesting, I think this question came up the last time I was here. You'll see in that last paragraph that they have to show how they're complying with their renewable energy and energy efficiency portfolio standard. So I believe that came up last time. So North Carolina does have this renewable portfolio standard. Virginia also does, I'll get to that slide, but theirs seems to be voluntary. So I'm not quite sure how the two compare. This is more from North Carolina, that they've got to look at purchased power, alternative supply-side energy resources, and demand-side management. And under alternative supply-side energy resources, you can see what it includes in North Carolina: hydro, wind, geothermal, solar thermal, solar photovoltaic, municipal solid waste, fuel cells, and biomass. So that's another area I found differing in the different states. Some states have a different definition on what qualifies. Georgia has lengthy rules in this area. Anyway, it defines integrated resource planning as a utility resource planning process in which an integrated combination of demand-side and supply-side resources is selected to satisfy future energy service demands in the most economic and reliable manner while balancing the interests of utility customers, utility shareholders, and society at large. All resources reasonably available to reliably meet future energy service demands are considered by the utility on a fair and consistent basis. They have detailed guidance on forecasting and on requirements to use an RFP process, request for proposal process, for each block of required new supply-side resources identified in the IRP. However, they have some exceptions. So you don't have to use an RFP process in certain areas. Those include repowering, life extension or efficiency improvement of an existing generating plant that does not require significant capital investment, supply-side capacity resources of extraordinary advantage that require immediate action and modification to comply with environmental regulatory requirements. So when you work on your IRP process, I thought, well, it might be helpful to see that there are some exceptions that people have listed in certain areas. Also, in the Georgia rules, this I didn't see anywhere else. I thought it was really interesting. They have stated the role and selection of an independent evaluator for the RFP. And basically, the evaluator is retained by the soliciting entity, the utility, but reports to the commission and staff. So that was an interesting hybrid. And also in Georgia, they have a 20-year period that they require the projections for. So again, you saw a listing in North Carolina for 15 and 20 in Georgia. And then we get to Florida. They have a 10-year process. Theirs is called the 10-year site plan process, but it's the same as an integrated resource planning. And they have to do it not less frequently than every 2 years. And then within 9 months of receipt of the proposed plan, they make a study of the plan and classify it as suitable or unsuitable. And they may suggest alternatives to the plan. This is the detail the commission uses to work on their integrated resource planning. They look at the need for electrical power in the area to be served, the effect on fuel diversity within the state, the anticipated environmental impact of each proposed site, possible alternatives to the proposed plan, the views of appropriate local, state, and federal agencies, including the views of the appropriate water management district as to the availability of water, and its recommendation as to the use by the proposed plant of salt water or fresh water for cooling purposes. I thought this was a really interesting one that's in the list. The extent to which the plan is consistent with the state comprehensive plan, how the plan dovetails with information of the state on energy availability and consumption, the amount of renewable energy resources the utility plans to produce or purchase over the 10-year horizon, and how it will be achieved. A statement describing how the production and purchase of renewable energy resources impact the utility's present and future capacity and energy needs. And the Florida Commission just released its 10-year site plan document. And again, they do this not through a hearing. They have a workshop, and then they have something called an internal affairs. That name is a little bit misleading. It's totally noticed and public. It's not something behind closed doors. They have an internal affairs. It's just less formal. So they do this process where the staff presents a draft report after the workshop, and it has all the details provided by the utilities attached to it. And then the commission asks questions at the internal affairs, and there will be changes based on that discussion. But theirs is not through the formal proceeding. Virginia's was really interesting, and through an order, and it was much more of an evidentiary process. So we have a wide range here. And in Virginia, they just issued their order in June 2019 on the Integrated Resource Plan. And again, I always think it's interesting who intervenes. They had Appalachian Voices, the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club, the Board of Supervisors of Culpeper County, the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition, the Solar Energy Industries Association, the Virginia Committee for Fair Utility Rates, and the Virginia Office of the Attorney General, Division of Consumer Counsel. So here they did hold a hearing. And in this case, they found the company had failed to establish that its 2018 IRP satisfied the statutory and regulatory requirements. So the company there was directed to rerun and refile the corrected results within 90 days. So the hearing was reconvened, and the commission ruled that the IRP then complied with the commission's directive, and here's their language, and is reasonable and in the public interest. And a lot of states do caveat it with for planning purposes. They're kind of noting that we're not making a decision on any of these facilities. So here I think that the Virginia order might be helpful if you're going an evidentiary process. Virginia, the order was, I thought, really eloquently written, but they noted that a primary purpose of an IRP is to give the public, which includes customers and the legislators who represent them, a reasonably accurate picture of the probable costs that customers will pay in the future to receive a reliable supply of electrical power, which is essential to modern life and commerce. And there, the commission had been concerned that while the IRP met legal and regulatory requirements, it may understate the costs facing the company's customers. I think that they had had a law passed that was going to require more costs. So they were just trying to make sure information was transparent. So it required Dominion and other utilities to include a true least cost plan in each IRP filing. And the plan is necessary to enable the public to know the additional costs of various planning scenarios. And it includes substantially fewer new plants to be built and is significantly less expensive for customers. Okay, I think we're ready to go to net energy metering. I know I'm breezing through these. I hope that's okay. I've watched, I know all your proceedings, so I know you all are putting in a lot of So next is net energy metering. So I'm sure you've seen your language. Includes establishing a methodology for calculating the value of the energy produced by customer generators. I'll get to it under best practices, but NRRI has done a new report on net energy metering, and that's been provided. I think it will be super helpful. They're so knowledgeable. Tom Stanton of NRRI did that work. So this is your law. I thought in some ways it was very specific, but then you see that last bullet. That's really wide open. Any other information the commission deems relevant? Okay, North Carolina. The General Assembly of North Carolina enacted House Bill 589 in the 2017 session. It's an act to reform North Carolina's approach to integration of renewable electricity generation and to enact the Distributed Resources Access Act. And it's a very far-reaching law, and it includes a section on net metering rates. So each public utility must file for commission approval revised net metering rates for electric customers that own a renewable energy facility for that person's own primary use or are customer generator lessees. And the commission must establish net metering rates under all tariff designs that ensure that the net metering retail customer pays its full fixed cost of service. And such rates may include fixed monthly energy and demand charges. Okay, Florida. We've already talked about this slide. This is the purpose. In Florida, they combined the net metering and the interconnection into one rule. It's all one rule. So we've talked about this slide here. Here you'll see that each investor-owned utility must install at no additional cost to the customer metering equipment at the point of delivery capable of measuring the difference between the electricity supplied to the customer from the IOU and the electricity generated by the customer and delivered to the IOU's electrical grid. And meter readings shall be taken monthly. Virginia has a series of rules addressing net energy metering. Again, they also combine the interconnection regs along with their net metering rules. And those include metering billing, payment and contract requirements, electric distribution between net metering customers, electric distribution companies, and energy service providers. In Florida, we don't have those different entities. Here is Virginia's definition of net metering customer, and here I thought it was interesting that they say one or more renewable fuel generators having an aggregate generation capacity of not more than 20 kilowatts for residential customers and not more than 1 megawatt for non-residential customers. So that was different than I saw elsewhere.
Pretty much the definition in Act 236, I think. Individual and commercial.
Good. Thank you. Virginia, they did similarly to others that they set out an expedited timeline for interconnection, and these are just their their dates. And again, some of this combines interconnection with the net metering. So in Virginia, the customer may begin operation of the generating facility on an interconnected basis when the customer has properly notified both the electric distribution company and the energy service provider of the customer's intent to interconnect. And then you'll see some of these same languages about disconnect switches in that bullet 2. They have to have a licensed electrician who will certify that any required manual disconnect switches are being installed and installed in accordance with the provisions of the National Electric Safety Code. And the vendor certifies also that they're in accord with certain standards, like the IEEE Standard 1547, and they have other specifications. Georgia has no rules on net metering. Again, this can all change in a day, but not now. Best practices. I know that we had been asked, I'd been asked kind of, well, who would you recommend, you know, are there models out there? And I realized that I'm not the person to recommend on that. So I have talked with a number of people. National Conference of State Legislatures, and this is included in your materials, 2017 paper on state net metering policies. Includes maps showing how the different states have approached it. I think they may be coming out with a 2019 one. And then there's this report, the NC Clean Energy Technology Center. They just released a quarterly report October 23rd, 2019. 50 states of solar net metering reforms dominate state policy activity. I've included an executive summary in your notebook, and I ordered myself the whole report, and it's very good, but I'm not allowed to share it because, you know, it's all, whatever it is, copyright. But my understanding is it would be free to you as a state commission. And then I mentioned that Tom Stanton of NRRI has recently issued this report, Review of State Net Energy Metering and Successor Rate Designs. And he's truly the expert, so I've included that in your materials. Okay, we're now at competitive procurement. This is your law. You're authorized to open a generic docket to create programs for the competitive procurement of energy and capacity from renewable energy facilities and within the Utilities Balancing Authority area if you determine it to be in the public interest. Okay, North Carolina, their House Bill 589 includes a section on competitive procurement. And they require each utility to file for commission approval a program for the competitive procurement of energy and capacity from renewable energy facilities. And their purpose is stated as to add renewable energy to the state's generation portfolio in a manner that allows the state's electric public utilities to continue to reliably and cost-effectively serve customers' future energy needs. I think we talked last time about whether there's still a balancing of considerations from both sides, and this would be an example where they were told to balance. It looks to me they were told to balance. This is some other language in their competitive procurement area. And here on that second bullet, they have a 20-year term for their contract or a different duration if determined to be in the public interest. This was interesting to me. I don't think I saw it. Well, it may be in other states, but didn't notice it, that no more than 30% of an electric public utility's competitive procurement may be satisfied through the utility's own development of renewable energy facilities. But there are some exceptions. It would not apply if the renewable facilities were acquired by an electric utility. They're just selected through the competitive procurement and are located in their service territory. But I know this has been a debate in Florida about utility-owned solar and, customer-owned. So I thought that was an interesting provision. I thought this was interesting too. Okay, the electric public utilities, again, North Carolina, may determine the location and allocated amount of the competitive procurement within their respective balancing authority areas, taking into consideration criteria such as the state's desire to foster diversification of siting of renewable energy resources, the efficiency and reliability impacts of siting of additional renewable facilities in the service territory, the potential for increased delivered cost to a public utility's customers as a result of siting, including additional costs of ancillary services and due to the operational or locational characteristics of a specific renewable energy resource technology. Okay, Florida. So Florida has a rule, and it doesn't, I've talked to the staff. I've been gone from the commission 5 years now, so, I have to cross-check. Basically, utilities are required to issue a request for proposal prior to filing a petition for determination of need for an electrical power plant in order to evaluate supply-side alternatives to its next planned generating unit. However, the rule does not prescribe a particular fuel source. This is what staff wanted me to mention. So they don't specifically list renewable in this rule. Also, on this requirement, there are some exceptions. So I wanted to remember to mention that. This is more information that's in the Florida rule. A lot of this is about notices in major papers. I assume you all have something similar. And they include in the rule the information that must be included in the notice.
You're speaking of the Florida rule, not the Florida statute. Is that correct?
That is correct. I do have to, I may have to cross-check, because in this area, there is a statute on renewables, but I believe this is in Rule 25-22082.
Thank you.
So the rule sets out information that must be included in the notice. Detailed description of the criteria and the methodology, including any weighting and ranking factors to be used to evaluate generating proposals, basis of price and non-price attributes. So it went into a lot of detail, but in addition, there is a statute on renewables. And this is 366.91. This includes the language again about the purpose of that law. And also each utility is required to continuously offer a purchase contract to producers of renewable energy. Georgia. Georgia has a lot of rules on competitive procurement, requests for proposals, quite a block of rules. Let's see what would be good to highlight here. So in their rule, they require that each block of required new supply side resources identified in the integrated resource plan, they must propose a schedule for conducting the RFP process. Now, again, there's going to be some exemptions on that. And the information must be considered public and made available to all potential bidders. So this was back to that language that the exemptions are for repowering, life extension, or efficiency improvements that do not require significant capital investments. So again, in some areas, at first when I look at them, I think there's an absolute requirement, but then the more I look at it, I see there are exceptions. Virginia's been doing a lot in competitive procurement. In 2018, they had this bill, the Grid Modernization and Security Act, Senate Bill 966. And this bill addresses a number of areas relating to renewables, as well as energy efficiency, energy storage, and electric distribution grid transformation projects. So I thought this was something I had not seen elsewhere. On September 16th, 2019, the governor issued Executive Order number 43 called Expanding Access to Clean Energy and Growing the Clean Energy Jobs of the Future. And that executive order directs the development of a plan of action to produce 30% of Virginia's electricity from renewable energy sources by 2030 and 100% by 2050, carbon-free sources. So Virginia is, they have a lot going on in this area. And I talked to their staff, and they have a report that's about to come out. In fact, I think it came out 2 days ago. The governor states that Virginia has a statewide goal of achieving 5,500 megawatts of wind and solar energy by 2028. And in furtherance of this goal, Dominion Energy has committed to annually procure up to 500 megawatts of utility-scale solar and onshore wind projects through a competitive procurement process. And Dominion has also committed to annual procurements of smaller-scale solar energy, including rooftop solar, through a competitive procurement process that will be issued annually beginning in 2019. So on the RPS area, Virginia has what's called a voluntary renewable energy portfolio goal, and it encourages investor-owned utilities to procure a percentage of the power sold in Virginia from eligible renewable energy sources. And the way they set theirs up is each investor-owned utility must report to the commission annually on its efforts, if any, to meet the RPS goals. And then the Virginia Corporation Commission also is required to provide a report to the Virginia General Assembly. And they provide information on the aggregate annual new construction and development of utility-owned, operated generating facilities from sunlight, the integration of utilities' renewable electric generation resources with the distribution grid, and some different data that's required directly from sunlight. So I thought, well, that was different. So I found this is our chart on processes. Again, that states are addressing things in different ways. And on interconnection, mostly seeing rules, but there we talked about North Carolina had used an order process and had that stakeholder workshop. On integrated resource planning, in Florida, again, they have a 10-year site plan, and theirs is through a workshop. In Virginia, there was that very detailed order where Virginia talked about the importance of integrated resource planning and had their utility refile a corrected version, which they then approved. In Georgia, there's elaborate rules. In North Carolina, order. Net metering, rule in Florida, rules in Virginia, not in Georgia. In North Carolina, they have told me that they're going to have rules soon. They had that statute that carved out what they were to do. I think that one's pretty recent statute, maybe a year ago. On competitive procurement, Florida has a statute on renewables, but it has the rule on competitive procurement generally, but not focused on renewables. Virginia had that quite lengthy statute, and then the governor's come out with an executive order. In Georgia, they have elaborate rules, and that's where they also had that interesting provision about the independent evaluator that's retained by the soliciting entity, but reports to the commission. In North Carolina, they had a statute on that. Let's see. And I thank you all. I'm very grateful for this project. I will do follow-up on the things that were raised. I think that is everything. Take a quick check here.
May I ask anyone, any commissioners, if you have questions? This is an interesting comparison, Ms. Miller. I appreciate you doing this. It kind of shows where we're got some similarities and might be able to draw some comparisons that some use for what we're doing as we move forward into this process. Certain. Commissioners, any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Commissioner Irvin.
you mentioned the recent NRRI report, and you referenced the author was Thomas who?
Stanton.
Stanton. Right. Did you say you had an executive summary of that, or the report
His
itself?
report we've provided.
Okay, great.
It's in your materials.
Is it in this notebook, the big notebook?
Yes. Oh, there's two notebooks, is it?
Right.
And it's the one that has the net metering, net energy.
Very good. Okay. Thank
He, I believe, gave a report at NARUC recently. I hated to miss that NARUC that was just in San Antonio. But, I mean, I just can't imagine there's somebody more knowledgeable.
Tom
Thank you.
Stanton is very, very good at what he does, that's for sure.
I should note that I have not vetted this report with anyone because I know you all have very tough confidentiality requirements and you have your ex parte provisions and all that. So if anyone does see any error, I'm very glad to know about it and I will be glad to correct it. And I will follow up on these. I'm going to follow up on the lessons learned in North Carolina. I'm going to see about a schedule that I might suggest. And also, I'm going to follow up on the manual disconnect switch.
Commissioner Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Miller, I'd note two things that you've shown us today that on two different states that seem to have slightly different requirements. And one of them was North Carolina, where you talk about the competitive procurement requirement could be no more than 30% from a utility's own development of its own renewable energy facilities. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was the only state. I noticed you pointed that out, so that it's obvious that you know, a lot of the new solar development will come in this competitive arena. But this law, it looks like, or policy in North Carolina, is prohibiting the utility from having no more than 30% from its own utility-owned development of its renewable facilities. Did you notice that to be the case, the only state that had?
That was the only one that I saw, and there are some exceptions listed there if the utility puts a request for proposal out. and certain conditions there, but I was very interested to see that because, again, this is a debate that I hear a lot. So,
I noted, and the other thing I noted that seemed to stick out is a little bit different from another state was Florida. In its IRP process, I noticed the considerations given to water supply, be it salt, you specifically highlighted that, be it salt or fresh water, and I know you probably know better than any of us, working with that commission, that both Florida's geography and Florida's geology make that a big issue with Florida having availability of fresh water versus the amount of salt water that, of course, that is in the state and that they're surrounded by, and even inland in some places. So I thought that didn't see any other state that you mentioned this morning that, of course, we all know water availability and water's becoming more scarce everywhere, but it looks like Florida has really, as you pointed out, makes a special mention of that.
it's a huge issue in Florida.
Right.
And I found it interesting that different states, I have no idea what the considerations are in South Carolina, but just that it was interesting to me that criteria was in there for Florida.
Appreciate you, pointing out these similarities from the various state and certainly the uniqueness and differences that they have too, and certainly appreciate your report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you again. Look forward into digging into this some more. And if there are no other questions, then we will adjourn. Thank you.
So much.